Hi everybody, my name is John Lockhart from the University of Edinburgh, and I'm glad to be here speaking to you today. I just want to give a kind of broad overview of who this talk is for, which is a nice way of saying basically everybody. Like anyone who's interested in this subject in general, you're all welcome. From university, government, web communications teams, agencies, product owners, core and contribute Drupal developers. This is a subject for everybody, and it's something that's been focusing my mind for some time. I should probably give a... I'm not very linear, by the way. I'm a bit circular, so I hope this goes well. But if I start saying things, then it's not part of the script, but it might fit in. We'll see. But I was here, I was actually not here, but in Barcelona last year doing this, and we talked about accessibility and governance. And recently it's become of interest to me that I'm very interested in web accessibility, but also sustainability. It's actually become some interest in me over the past 2 years how much they have in common, which is partly what this talk is about, really. So I'm going to go through that. This is just an overview of basically the session map where we're going with this, but as I say, I've got a few slides to get through, so I'm going to skip over this, as it were. The learning objectives from this, we're hoping to see, well, hopefully by the end of this, we'll hopefully see how accessibility and sustainability reinforce each other and in many ways complement each other, how we map the web sustainability guidelines to Drupal configurations and modules within a Drupal framework, how we appreciate UX strategies and core web vital strategies and estimating carbon strategies, how we appreciate those, and how we can embed practices via governance into our workflows, and how that relates to the Drupal Open Web Manifesto. So let's hope. Why now? My first instinct to that is why not? And I've been interested in web accessibility for some time now, and now that I've been thinking a lot more about web sustainability and web accessibility, this is always just a good thing to do. It's just good moral stuff to do. But I will admit there's been some recent drivers that have maybe focused the attention on some people. The European Accessibility Act has basically been made effective in 2025. So we're in that world now. We're in the European Union. There's legislation to heighten and strengthen the conformance with accessibility guidelines. I know that's not quite straightforward, but if you take it from my perspective, I work for a public sector university in the UK. We're part of the Web Accessibility Directive, I think, which is throughout Europe, where essentially, to sum it up, we have to comply with the W3C WCAG 2.2 AA standards, and we have to produce our accessibility statements based upon our reporting and auditing of our websites to produce to that. And so this is something that affects the public sector, not only in Britain, but throughout the European Union. And this is now being rolled out in some form or another across the European Union. It's early days, and I'll be the first to admit I'm not an expert in the European Accessibility Act, but it's something that's becoming increasingly to everyone's attention. So that's one of the major drivers that's come into force this year. WCAG itself 2.2 is now stable with the new success criteria involved, and this is at this point where I promise you I don't fully understand this, but let me give this a go. In terms of web performance, it's interesting that as a core web vital, there's moves in how core web vitals are essentially 3 specific metrics that Google use to quantify the experience of their web pages, and loading, interactivity, and visual stability. These metrics are considered important as how they determine their search engine ranking. And there's been a recent move to something which I will be the first one to admit I don't fully understand this, but the interaction to next paint. In essence, Google moved to this move to get a better measure of how interactive and responsive a website is from the user's perspective for the duration of their visit. So that includes the full latency of all their user interactions, whether it be taps and clicks or pressure and keyboard pressures. And they hope to paint a more comprehensive and accurate picture of the page's real-world responsiveness. Now, to me, this is slightly boiling down to metrics, because this is something I'm going to be coming back to throughout this presentation, is performance. Performance is going to come up again and again in this. And this is just, again, one way of seeing how performance metrics will make an appearance in this presentation on many slides going forward. So that's some of the external things. This is by no means all that's going on, but there's some of the things to be aware of as to why we're motivated to talk about this. But I'm just happy to talk about this because I genuinely find it interesting. For the past 2 years, I found this crossover and this overlap quite interesting. So I think the core thesis here is that, or let me try and put it this way. The core thesis is that accessible websites are often simpler and faster. Their simpler and faster websites are more energy efficient in themselves, and open web choices reduce bloat and lock-in. So ultimately, less cognitive load and fewer bytes shipped that can equal to better for users and better for the planet. That's a sort of core thesis there. I've attempted to put a sort of accessibility, sustainability overlap into one slide. How successful this is, you'll be the judge of that, but there's some elements here. Semantic HTML, if you're using more semantic HTML as it should be used, that is a richer, accessible experience. You have less of a reliance on JavaScript. Performance, again, that is just better for everybody, better for assistive technology, better for everybody, and reduces energy use. Content strategy with fewer clear pages, less waste. I've been reading recently a number of blogs from my colleagues at the university of the importance of content auditing and content strategy and going through your existing content and, bluntly put, getting rid of content. That's a rather brutal way of looking at it, but improves the navigation. There's just shorter user journeys. It makes a massive difference, and that's something that I've been reading my colleagues' blog posting, and I'll refer to a couple of those. It's not directly my area, but I find it interesting how it's becoming a really important part of our strategy at the University of Edinburgh. And device awareness, so anything that's perceivable on a website, it's more perceivable and less unnecessary data usage. In the UK, we're subject to these online newspapers. I won't name any names, but if you try and use their websites, there's almost an onslaught of autoplay videos and overlays and things, and everything just slows down the experience when actually what you're wanting is the content. So anything that's blocking you, anything that's a friction between you and the content that you came for in the first place, try and get rid of that bloat, basically. So an accessible web is often a greener web. By focusing on inclusive, efficient design, we eliminate waste, wasted bytes, wasted energy, and wasted user effort. Okay. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the W3C Web Sustainability Guidelines. Again, I'm not an expert in this, but I'll give it a go. The draft Web Sustainability Guidelines were inspired by the success of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, in improving web practices. And there's a link to the blog post there, talking a bit more about it. And there is, of course, the actual draft guidelines itself. The two share a common ethos. You want to put people first. You want to optimize for equitable access. So what is it? What are they? So it's a draft guidelines document available online. It's divided up into 4 categories. It covers user experience, web development, hosting, infrastructure, and business and product. And like WCAG, it has evidence-based guidelines and success criteria. Still a draft, so it's not official. I've got here, think WCAG inspired, but for the sustainability across the product lifecycle. This is important to me because about approximately 5 years ago, I was basically in charge at some level of moving what was then the law school website over to a new platform. I won't bore you with that, but we moved it to essentially a Drupal-based platform. But at that time, we were working with a third-party agency for the design, for the front-end pattern lab design, and like the nature of projects, it's still etched upon my heart. The nature of these projects, you were given the pattern library, the design library, and you're basically there to implement it. It's all implemented. And just at that time, in the UK, the regulations for public sector body accessibility regulations came in right then. So from day one, our website had to be accessible and meet the WCAG. It was back then 2.1 AA, and it had to be that from day one. And that will be etched upon my heart. I'll never forget that, because it's become quite clear that whilst I was interested in accessibility before, I will admit I wasn't prepared for how we had to really get that right. and it was a third-party agency, and no offence, but third-party agencies are not necessarily renowned for their expertise in the subtleties of the W3C WCAG regulations. Don't mean to offend anybody, I'm just making a point of how I found it at the time. So what's interesting to me, at least, is that from the fact that I work at the University of Edinburgh, it's really etched upon my brain that we are dominated by us meeting the WCAG regulations, and that's it's law as far as we're concerned, you know, and the organisation is very, very keen on meeting those guidelines. So it's not just maybe some other people, it's like a nice to have. For me, it's the law, and we're seeing that in the direction of travel with the European Accessibility Act and all that. I find this new set of regulations for the Web Sustainability Guidelines interesting because it's a move into a similar territory for me that I certainly see at the University of Edinburgh. There's a big push, there's been a lot of projects about sustainability across the whole university estate, and digital hosting and infrastructure is part of that, including websites. And I would not be at all surprised, I have no evidence for this, but I would not be at all surprised in the future legislation in the long term will go down that road. And in the same way that they use WCAG as a baseline for people to meet, I wouldn't be at all surprised of looking at these regulations going forward. Maybe not in the foreseeable future, but I definitely see that something similar will occur probably in the public sector and then going forward. So there's reasons why the public sector get put in first, but I won't get too distracted about that for now. But I can certainly, this is the direction of travel as far as I'm concerned. Now, people may disagree with me on this, but in the same way that my life is obsessed with accessibility, I can certainly see a direction of travel with this. And also, it's just good moral stuff, as I hope you'll see over time. You may or may not agree with everything, but there's something there to be said about it. So I'll just quickly go through like some of the categories here, just kind of skim over some of these. As I say, of course, going to the original document is always going to be best, but some of the things raised in the UX category: minimizing non-essential content. Again, it's interesting how a number of colleagues are focusing on that. Having clear information architecture and patterns, so when you've got your design libraries, make sure that you've got consistent templates, consistent approaches to presenting information. It's good for the user. Good. Inclusive language, readable typography, and respecting user preferences. There's a lot of users that may choose to configure their browsers or their devices in their way and don't particularly want things thrust upon them in certain ways. So just always being respectful of that. They may have the reasons for that. It's just less friction for all. There's fewer bytes involved. Web development, removing render blocking. Sometimes you'll have like some third-party script that will actually prevent the page from being loaded, or actually prevent it being loaded quickly or correctly. Trying to remove unnecessary or unused assets. Using native semantics, trying to resort to using good semantic HTML rather than using things that both the browser and sometimes the assistive technology doesn't fully understand. So it's good to remember that if you're using assistive technology, screen readers, other software. Minimizing dependencies on your frameworks. Optimizing images and video, and fonts to a certain extent, but optimizing images and video. You'll see, I won't try and jump around too much, but if you want big wins, images and video are certainly something that you should be looking at. And of course, guardrails using your CI/CD pipeline, pipeflow, if your team uses that. And I'll try not to jump around, but in some ways Drupal can shine quite well in this area, because when you install Drupal core, it already comes a lot with same defaults and module choices if you just start from Drupal core from the start. So there's a lot, I'll come back to this, but there's a lot of good stuff built in already in the Drupal core framework. So we'll do that. Hosting and infrastructure. This is quite interesting about again, according to the guidelines, how you go about choosing greener providers for your hosting and grids. I might come back to this, but I find this area quite interesting personally, because I'm going to refer to a set of blog posts later on, and it's interesting how a lot of work was done at the university to find out what was going on. I think I'm allowed to say this. At my university, half the time we're trying to get the data just to work out what on earth is going on. And I think it's interesting to raise this, that We've had a wonderful man, Oshu, but other people who've looked into this. And I think, without going too deep into it, the short answer is it depends. You know, if you're trying to work out your host, is your host a green provider or not, the answer is it depends. It's complicated, and nobody's really got any straight answers. And maybe certain hosting providers, maybe some people are more upfront and helpful in telling you what the situation is. Maybe some other ones are a little bit more reluctant to tell you what their situation is. Sometimes it's just hard to get the data. And as I say, I try not to jump around, but I remember there was a really good anecdote by an agency called Manifesto, actually, in the UK. And what I remember that was interesting, that conversation I had, they gave a presentation on this. They did a big project with, I think, a government agency, actually. And the key to their making any progress with this is that they found, and let's just call them a Drupal certified partner. I'm going to try not get into trouble today. I'll try. But let's call them a big Drupal certified partner. And I believe that my understanding is that they made immense progress because there was a champion in the organization, like somebody who was really passionate and concerned within the organization, who was really prepared to dig into the detail, get into the data, and return the data. That was an interesting insight, is that half the time you need a champion within the organization to help you find this information out, because it's really hard to get this data sometimes. So it's an interesting perspective on this, and precise, and also it comes back to where's your website being hosted? What data center? How's it being powered? I might have a question here at the back. And do you want to use the microphone, sir? I'm a bit lazy, but if you could just ask your question.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks. Would AI be in this category?
I promised myself I was going to try and avoid to use the word AI in this presentation. I'd made a promise to myself, but damn, you've caught me. You've caught me. You've like a big arrow. You found it. You know. I did catch that. Did you catch the Dries? No, I was just catching it, and there was some crazy statistic that OpenAI's and they're building these data centers, and they're. I don't exactly remember, but just go back and look at the Dries. I think Dries was saying that with 6 nuclear power stations to produce. You know, I mean, it's insane, right? It's insane.
1 gigawatt per week, something like that.
I'm happy for the data. You know, like all data, good data. It's good data to know. Yeah, I kind of promised myself not to talk too much about this, but it's kind of unavoidable, isn't it? What I'm discussing today is really good from the perspective of governance and how you try and govern an environment. AI is a very, very interesting area. There's part of me that kind of loves it. There's part of me that kind of is horrified and terrified by the whole thing. So I'm somewhere in the middle, but I do agree that one of the things that's meant to come out of this presentation is that when I come across people who are really into engineering and technology, when I don't do this all the time, but when I do come across people who are really into engineering and technology, it's funny how a lot of the time I meet them, they're as passionate about some of these areas like performance and analysis, and if you come from a computer science background, there's like the complexity of algorithm. You know, there's a lot of engineering mindset. So actually the people who are into, again, I don't want to get distracted here, but if you think about Formula One, a lot of people who are into Formula One, they're always looking for efficiencies. They're always looking for savings in the aerodynamics. They try to reduce the car and weight and stuff. So there's a lot of these engineering principles, a lot of these ways that people are trained as engineering, they see this as opportunities for performance efficiencies. So the people who are fascinated about sustainability are usually the people who are interested in performance as well. So there's some crossover here. And I try and have a relatively open-minded view about this. So we're coming back to the question about AI. I'm excited, but I also at the same time, I'm trying not to swear. There's a lot of excitement, a lot of interest there, but there's also a lot of hype out there. And I think Linus Torvalds, the creator of Linux, said something similar, is that I love AI. AI is going to be part of our infrastructure. Same way that 20 years ago, the internet was going to be part of our infrastructure. AI is going to be part of our infrastructure. But man, the hype right now, it makes you want to lie down sometimes. So yes, I love AI, but I do see there's a lot of people in the first wave who are just keen to throw nuclear reactors at this problem, but I think long term I'd like to be optimistic and say that the sustainability will kick into the way. I've heard anecdotal reports that Google and OpenAI claim that they're getting some of their search queries to be almost as good as your traditional old style Google query. Whether you believe that or not, this is just anecdotal evidence. But one would like to think that the engineers have got a motivation to, and also it just makes financial sense at some point. You can't just keep spending money you don't have. You want to be efficient and optimize over time anyway. So it's probably a very woolly answer to the question. I try and keep an open mind with AI, but at the same time, I do have mixed feelings about it. Part of me loves it, part of me is, so I don't know if that's an answer, but I'll go with that. But I do find that a lot of these principles in here, again, good governance and a good approach to what I guess Dries and Drupal would call the open web, really important. So I'm going to try and keep to that holistic side, and I might mention AI again, but let's just try and move on. Sure. But do feel free to ask. I'm not an expert. Again, half the battle is getting the data, and I know that certainly in university that's been part of the challenge, is actually just trying to acquire the data. I better mention this, that if you're interested, Edinburgh University has, in my opinion, well, certainly one of the most advanced projects for AI. It's all coming out now. Edinburgh University has one of the most advanced projects for AI in Britain, the United Kingdom, and maybe even the world, I don't know, but certainly in the United Kingdom, we've got this project called the Edinburgh Language Model. And it's essentially, we put a lot of effort into our own interface, that we put a lot of effort into guardrails for accessibility, privacy, security. We're hosting it on our own data centers. It's on our own, like own your own bricks, as someone once said. So we have really put a lot of effort into having it managed on our premises, the King's Building premises, and so we've started off using the OpenAI API with the zero data. So a lot of work's been done into the privacy of using that, because as you can imagine, privacy, that's a very big important thing for our approach. But there's a lot of effort going into using open source models. Like, we really want to kind of wean ourselves off OpenAI. So like, there's been a lot of emphasis on using more on our internal hardware, using, like, I think the one that comes to mind is Llama, Facebook's Llama, and that's actually hosted in-house, and so we don't have any need to go outside the building, if that makes sense. And one of the reason I'm telling the story is that we're quite proud of the ELM, but what's interesting is that one of the motivating factors is to become more sustainable about using our AI models. And one of the reasons given is that we're really looking hard, not just at Llama, but other open source models, but we're looking at Llama because that's an important part of our sustainability strategy. Now, I'm not going to start claiming, and I don't know, by the way, but I'm not going to start claiming that Llama is somehow a more sustainable AI model. But one of the things we can do is, by having our own hardware, we can actually do some data to try and understand what energy usage it's actually using, because at the moment we don't know. So this is, again, part of our, I'm not going to claim that Llama is somehow an efficient model, but at least we can start by looking at the data of how much we're using in our own infrastructure to try and judge these kind of things. So it's a start. So it's part of a strategy.
How did you call the problem, and how did you call this problem? This AI problem?
How did I solve this AI problem?
The name of the
Oh, sorry, I do apologize. So the name of the program is called the Edinburgh Language Model. Yeah, the Edinburgh Language Model. We have a habit of calling things after ourselves. But if you go into the edinburghed.ac.uk website and search for the Edinburgh Language Model, there'll be more information there. And I think it's safe to say that Edinburgh is one of the leading, if not the leading, university in Britain, for sure, United Kingdom. I think I genuinely think we're way ahead in compared to other institutions. I mean, I would say that, but I genuinely think we are. We're pretty ahead of that. And I can't speak for international universities, but I think we're doing okay there. So, plug for Edinburgh. But there's also another plug for Edinburgh later on, but that's nothing. And sorry, so coming back to this caching aggressively, it's showing that this is back to the WSG guidelines about caching your content aggressively, trying to use content delivery networks, compressing all the information that's being squirted out, using modern protocols like HTTP2 that really, the whole point is to try and squirt that data out more efficiently as possible. and long-term plans for resilience. The infrastructure decisions are in themselves user experience decisions and sustainability decisions. So it's a, this time it's really the case that the hardware is at the core of what you're delivering. And finally, business and product. This is to show that certainly in Edinburgh as well, that there's a big focus not just on the technology, but there's a lot of the governance that goes into ensuring that your whole approach is meeting these standards. So trying to assign ownership and try to set budgets and KPIs to departments and key stakeholders, report progress with continuous improvement, favouring open source and transparency. Again, Drupal's absolutely perfect for that, and then a plan for end of life and archival strategies. Again, with content auditing, we're going through a major process of archiving content. That's a big part of what it is we're doing, is archiving content. I'm going to get into trouble. I cannot tell you how many websites are in the university estate. I'm not going to get into trouble. I can't tell you. Let's just leave it at that. Right, okay. And I'm really trying not to get into trouble today. I'll do my best. So how does Drupal fit into all this? I think the good news is that by implementing the WSG recommendations, it's very achievable within a Drupal framework. I always prefer to mention the Drupal core framework. I think it's easier just to say if you focus on Drupal core and then from there build up, that there's configurations you can make. You install Drupal core, as we all know. You can build up from like modules and configurations. And a lot of those efforts within core and the community provided modules, a lot of the efforts there already support these best practices. So in many cases, Drupal core and the community provided modules, they already support these best practices, basically. So if you look at Drupal core today, you've got strengths in there already. You've got the Olivero theme, a theme that a lot of work has went into that theme to ensure its compatibility with WCAG. It's a really great baseline theme. The opportunity to do responsive imagery and image styles in core. Lazy load, again, an example I would say of open web where lazy load is something that was built into Drupal core. It was just something that you got advantage of being part of the framework. Though over time, as you're on the so-called train lines in Drupal core, things come along where you can take benefit of that just by being on the framework. So that's a nice touch, it's a nice pattern that you see sometimes in Drupal where some of these things can just come along as well. Also, the caching layer in Drupal I think is well known and really in some ways amazing, the caching layer in Drupal. So a lot of the stuff is already there and it may need to be switched on or configured or governed, but there's a lot of good stuff already built into that framework. And I'm not an expert in other frameworks, but I've always been consistently impressed with Drupal about how well it manages to adapt to these sort of situations. There's a lot built in there. As I say, I'm not going to try to talk too much about other frameworks, partly because I'm not that expert in other frameworks, but it's something particularly evident in Drupal, and it ties in with their open web approach and the Open Web Manifesto. It's quite nice to see. As part of the strategy, you can introduce accessibility guardrails for authors. There's a lovely module called Editorially that I will admit I don't use it in our active websites, but I have played with it, and it's a very nice it's a nice module you can install on your Drupal websites where essentially it does this sort of inline authoring checks for accessibility. It's a very nice module, and I'd highly recommend you Google it and take a look at it. It's maintained by the person I know is from Princeton University. I think I think he's one of the maintainers, if not the lead on it. And it's a very nice. If you go to their website and check it out, it's like an editorial-facing accessibility checker. And so, as an editor, it raises issues within the editor to see if you're coming across any potential issues. So that's a nice thing. It adds some guardrails for authors. It's a nice way of looking at that. But also, just coming back to, we use a platform, our our platform at the University of Edinburgh is called EdWeb2, and so some of the next things we implement in our framework, for example, we enforce alt text in the media forms, as part of the EdWeb2 platform, which is Drupal based. It's a Drupal platform. We have heading, structure guidance, not only in the platform but also in the editorial documentation and the training. People are forced to go through, well, they have to go through mandatory training, let's put it like that. Mandatory training, which raises not only the how to use the platform, but also effective digital content, and issues like this tie in with how you use the platform to its best ability. The component library, we use a design library called EdGel, and so that's very tightly coupled with the content management system, obviously. So the component library is very heavily tested with tested patterns, content patterns. We've got a whole UX team. I'm going to say the word Emma Harrell, who's the user experience manager at University and a big Drupal contributor. So again, a lot of work is going into the user experience aspect of our platform. So again, these kind of guardrails that with sufficient training and support for the platform, people can deliver both accessible but sustainable experiences. Images are clearly the biggest, easiest wins, like being able to configure responsive images per breakpoint, using a file format like WebP. Now, again, I'm not a guru, but I'm going to just quickly go over this. That WebP is an image file format developed by Google that provides superior compression for images on the web, resulting in smaller file sizes and faster page loading time. So, my understanding is that it's becoming easier in Drupal core going forward to maybe make. It's much more easier, I think, for sure, if you just install Drupal from day one. But there's movements towards using these more advanced image formats as part of that. I don't think they're mandatory, as I say. I'm not absolutely sure, but I think there's more effort to make sure that these are things that you can deliver through the platform, basically. And I'll come back to a second how Edinburgh has approached that issue. Defining the quality and size budgets per template of imagery. If your templates are, if you've got standard templates, you can try and control the degree of when images are used within that, maybe even giving budgets to certain templates, and preferring SVGs over simple graphic icons. It's making these wins coming from images and starting to make it policy. It's not just a suggestion. You try and implement its policy into the content management system. I've got an example later on, so that's maybe why I'm mentioning it there. Some front-end performance tuning to make sure that when you go into your platform, make sure that the CSS and the JS aggregation, make sure that that's turned on, and try and make efforts to defer non-critical JavaScript, and ideally trying to reduce JavaScript by default, but that's maybe a rather extreme view. A lot of the time when you do an audit of the web pages, sometimes it's third-party tags that sometimes when you're doing a page weight or something that's making a page load slower, it can be that maybe there's some sort of third-party library or something that's been added that could be slowing that. So again, it's worth doing an audit to, again, coming back to doing audits and trying to get data to try and understand where there may be issues. That's a kind of recurring theme in this presentation. So again, taking advantage of the really caching abilities of Drupal and combining that with content delivery networks to try and make sure that if you've got especially an international audience, making sure that data gets closer cached to their territory, especially if you've got an international university, for example, people trying to access data from there, cut down on direct access to our own servers, as it were. And correcting cache metadata. It's trying to lower server work, basically, in that regard. Use of semantic HTML markup, it's really important from the perspective of, it just makes, I think, life a lot simpler for everybody, but also when you're using assistive technologies. I know that I've used screen readers in the past where if you have an assistive technology that's trying to understand what's going on, it's going to understand a semantic HTML, something that's clearer rather than maybe something that's been, if you've got an element that's been maybe done using JavaScript or something, the assistive technology is going to understand it better, so which then reduces complexity to the page. And just trying to stick to, again, with screen users in mind, landmark regions and correct heading orders, real buttons as opposed to using a div or some JavaScript, actually using real button HTML. It's better for assistive technology, uses less JavaScript. It's just a more durable user interface over time. Media alternatives. Alt text is essentially default on our platform, and is default on Drupal and modern Drupal frameworks. Alt text is informative, not decorative. Captions and transcripts for audio-visual elements, offering text equivalents to media, heavy media items. If you're near a university and you've got a really very good computer and a very good connection, that's fine. But if you're on your mobile in certain parts of the world and you're not getting a connection, sometimes being a bit more forgiving of saying maybe you don't autoplay that video, and then you can maybe offer a transcript ideally to that video that allows people to, especially both for accessibility reasons but sustainability, people can get an idea of what the video is about without necessarily having to download the video, or at least making it an option. So if they're just trying to get to access information on the page, it's respecting user choice and also trying to avoid unnecessary data transfer. So interesting there. Content strategy and sustainability. It's not my specialist area, but I've got a number of colleagues, and that includes Emma, who is here, and she'll be speaking on Thursday, by the way, so do check out Emma Harrell's talk. Is that content strategy and sustainability, there's a big effort amongst a number of my colleagues to perform content audits and within our existing estate. And it just leads to better results. I think Emma blogged about this quite recently with a recent example in the career service, I think it was, where you try and prune the rot, the redundant, outdated, trivial content, clearer navigation, you limit the depth of the content if possible, reduce the nature of the user journey, so like a shorter, quicker user journey, template library. So it just makes life easier, and it's a pattern that I see again at the university, that the first thing you do when you're re-evaluating your website, looking at content audits, fewer better pages would equal a lower cognitive load and fewer resources. Again, hosting and providers, I think I've touched on this already, that it's interesting to really work with your partners to do your best to try and get the data, to try and understand that do they support the latest protocols like HTTP2, and where, if you're extreme, you can maybe go and say, well, where are you hosting your data? Where are these data centers? What are they powered by? Now that's a whole other level of detail, but it's certainly something that's happening not only within the university, but also these metrics tools that I'll mention later on. We're looking at a lot of tools that are hopefully going to try and attempt to identify the data going forward as to where is your data being hosted, and how is it being hosted and used, and how is it being powered. So I can see that. It's in its infancy at the moment, but it's certainly going to be increasingly relevant, and especially as we become more dependent on dashboards and metrics. It'll be interesting to see that. And by tracking it, we'll be able to get more definable results as to where our hosting and how performant it is. I threw in this just here about the analytics. I put here a company called Matomo. I know nothing about them, but I think it was more to just try and illustrate that a lot of people are obviously using the popular analytics providers and maybe using other. It may be worth examining using different analytics solutions. It may be, depending on your analytics provider, it may be worth investigating what's in the market, and maybe being able to, maybe in our case, University of Edinburgh, maybe it's something that we may look to in the future. We may be inclined to have a more sovereign approach in the future. I'm not saying that's just my opinion. I don't have any evidence for that, but it could be that maybe one day we may say, well, yes, like everyone else, we're using Google Analytics, but maybe one day we might ask ourselves, well, how would we make our data more sovereign? And then in that approach, not only how do I make it more sovereign, but where am I hosting it and how performant it is. So it's something to bear in mind. A lot of the third parties may have third-party scripts that you're asked to put on your website. Maybe each one of those adds a certain degree of latency. Every time somebody asks to add something to your website, some third-party piece of code that you put in, that adds latency, potential bloat, potential accessibility issues. So maybe as a part of an audit, we should be quite clear about what's going on and maybe have a very clear audit about what we need and what we don't. And that in itself can help the performance and the sustainability of the site. Now, this is a bit extreme. I'm afraid these are just not, so don't get too worried about the numbers here, but it's just to try and say this is maybe one approach, is to try and say, well, how do you start quantifying some of this stuff? Is there some tools that could help you as part of your audit? Say for a typical template, how much weight is there for a typical template? You know, how much JavaScript appears on certain pages? Some of the core web vitals. Okay, maybe I don't understand this, but these could be, as part of an audit, you could, I suppose, feasibly have people do some serious auditing of your website and try and get some data and some numbers to try and understand what's going on. And maybe some image constraints per the components that you're using or the templates that you're using. Numbers create clarity. You know, you have that as part of your workflow to say that you can report back and say, well, this is what we're identifying here. Maybe some improvements could be made in the framework. Coming back to things I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know if you see a pattern emerging here. So certain teams have CI/CD pipelines, continuous integration pipelines. So as part of regression testing, I know that the Edinburgh team uses some regression testing tools as part of the workflow. I don't believe that they use these, but these were some suggestions for maybe as a potential, if your team is already using pipelines, this could be some of the things that you could consider introducing into your workflow. And of course, I've only used one of these, and that was the Pali one. And again, it's something you may determine whether you want to include or not as part of your workflow. But it's certainly worth investigating. These are things that you could certainly use as part of your workflow. Your team may decide not to, but they may also decide to investigate it further, because it could give you some ideas that when you, for example, if somebody makes a change to your design system, for example, then if something fails based upon the change that was made, you can maybe sort of go back and see what was the issue was, if there was something that was brought up. And maybe over time that could help get a picture of how contributions to the code base could maybe over time determine issues that are raised. You know, any issues that are brought into the design system, you want to try and eliminate them at the start initially, rather than sort of wait for something to be added and then retrospectively realise it's a bad idea. So maybe these approaches and tools could help. I'm being a bit careful here, but they could be part of a workflow. It might be part of a potential workflow. Dashboards and reporting. I'll try and come on to later on about some of the things we use in Edinburgh, but it could be that more data and more data is important for how we make our decisions. Per template, data about the number of bytes that are used in certain templates, any accessibility issues that are raised through the age of the issue, estimating key journeys using like carbon data to try and understand these key journeys, part of an ongoing governance review, and sometimes these dashboards can sort of hopefully give you some insights as to certain things where you can make improvements through your ongoing governance approach. Maybe there's a monthly, quarterly review of certain approaches, and maybe dashboards can help you do that in your reporting, perhaps. I'll mention a couple of tools later on about that we use at the University of Edinburgh. And again, per role, people in the product roles have to maybe try and set budgets or prioritise outcomes. In the design content roles, you have to focus on the accessibility and sustainability of patterns of the information architecture, trying to prune the content rot. Engineering, maybe using some of those techniques and CI/CD techniques in performance and engineering. And in the operations, looking to your hosting and seeing if your hosting is efficient and using all the latest techniques and abilities to, and actually examine the hosting itself to try and understand if that hosting itself is in itself naturally inclined to sustainability. And The governance practices, again, something that you can try and introduce to something that is ongoing and sort of baked in over time, so that you maybe have like reviews over like once a month or once a quarter. You try and have a definition of done, which includes checks on accessibility and performance checks, pre-launch audits or post-launch reviews, change logs, and maybe some red flags that maybe occur when you know that something has been breached or something. Try and have a baked-in ritual that keeps the standards alive, ongoing, rather than, for example, we've had an experience at the university at the moment where people come and people go, and of course they have specialist knowledge in those organisations, and they have their specialist knowledge, but when they leave the organisation, we lose that knowledge. And so anything you can do to try and bake that into the process, the framework, the governance, the data, anything you can build in that, it's an ongoing effort rather than somebody walking in the building and taking that. They may be doing great heroic work, but if they've left and nobody knows where to pick up, and if there's nothing in the framework to keep that work going, you're going to lose a lot of that, and it's going to be sad for the organisation, obviously. I'm going to try and drag this back to a case study, which is basically the University of Edinburgh. They've got a case study here. There's a pattern here in the sense that I should state this from the start. I did nothing. The work was done by the people I'm going to tell you about, so they deserve all the credit and all the work, so they deserve it all. I did nothing. I'm really interested in accessibility, and I'm here to talk about accessibility and sustainability, but there's been a lot of really great work done by the team in this student internship program, which has led to a real emphasis on digital sustainability work, not just within the interns, but throughout the whole web team, and I think beyond, in the whole information services structure. This work has really influenced thinking, and that's a big step for me observing from the outside, I suppose. It's really affected the way people think about their roles and how they approach their roles. It's had a seismic effect on certainly the web team, the EdWeb team, and the wider team in information services. It's this ongoing sustainability review has brought up a lot. It's made people change their way of thinking and how they approach their work. So it's fascinating to observe this. The focus of there have been a number of focuses on this. I've talked about image weight, but also analysis of existing user experience templates, looking at content audits and redundant content. With some outcomes, there's measurable byte reductions and faster user experience, and some policy updates that have followed on from that. So I'll start to talk a little bit about the experience at University of Edinburgh. So in the past 2 years, student internships have worked on investigating the sustainability challenges faced by the university's web estate and research potential solutions that we could consider to use in the future. And I met with the interns about a couple of years ago, I think. It was the Osh, Doherty, and Catalina and Christopher, and we've got another two sustainability interns that have joined us recently to continue on that work. The work on these digital sustainability projects has been documented in a number of blog posts. There's been a lot of work that's gone on, which can be found here. If you were to take one photograph throughout this presentation, this would be the one, because this is like a category of blog posts on the website communications blog, and it covers a wide range of themes raised from user experience to content strategy to hosting. A lot of great work that's been done here. I'll try and so I'll definitely let you have an opportunity of that picture, because if there's one thing to take away from it, go back and read the work that's gone on there. Incredible amount of work by the team. We've done really amazing work and very influential work. Like really some serious people who really had their way of thinking shaped by a lot of the work that's been going on here. So I'd highly recommend you look at those series of blog posts. And I certainly know that Emma Horrell's posted some really interesting blog posts there as well, so she's involved as well. And I'm just going to plug Emma's talk again on Thursday, by the way, so do check out in the programme. Emma Horrell, she'll be talking soon, and she'll no doubt be mentioning some of these related issues as well. So I should probably explain that EdWeb 2 is the name of the University of Edinburgh's Drupal web content management system. The University of Edinburgh has a centralised content management system like a lot of universities do. We've got a central web platform, and it's called EdWeb 2. I'll try not to give you too much of a history, but as you might imagine, there was an EdWeb 1. You might imagine that. And after some serious deliberation by the team, I think over a number of months, maybe even years, it was finally decided that EdWeb 2 was going to be the natural name for the next content management system. From my perspective, the serious change that happened between EdWeb 1 and EdWeb 2 was that EdWeb 1 was essentially based on Drupal 7. And Drupal, so EdWeb 2 was really the move to EdWeb. I think it was the move to Drupal 9. I think it was. It was the move from Drupal 7 to Drupal 9. That was the big architectural move there, and that was the big sign. But there was a lot of other things on top of that as well. But just to give you the kind of context as to and this was fully implemented about 2 or 3 years ago, this transition from EdWeb 1 to EdWeb 2. So it's the Central University Web Content Management System. And as you might imagine, with it being on that Drupal 9, Drupal 10 rail track, obviously we're talking about a different beast, obviously, compared to the old system of Drupal 7. We're a different beast, and so because we're on the train tracks, we are all it's constantly being updated, and there's a lot of work going on by the team. And there was a recent update, I think a couple of months ago, which successfully implemented some sustainable web design principles across 65,539 pages. Now, this is where I'm going to start getting into trouble here, so I'm trying not to tell you. It's just as well I don't know, because I'm trying not to tell you how many websites we have. The way that EdWeb 2 is structured is that we've got a range of, and I'm not an expert in this, but essentially you've got the core code base, and then the way that it's architected, we have a number of websites for schools and departments, and it's all controlled by that core code base. And of course, any changes are then aggregated to the network. So you've got the school sites, you've got departmental sites, and below that you've got sub-sites as well. So any changes are obviously fanned out across those that web estate. So I'm trying to paint the sense of scale there, so that when changes happen, they happen at a big scale. So that figure of 65,539 approximately web pages, just to give you a sense of the scale of the change that we're making here. So what changed? So the EdWeb 2 team made 2 key changes to reduce the page weight of the websites. Simply put, it meant that the file size of EdWeb 2 web pages were smaller, meaning less energy is needed to be stored, loaded, and to transfer them. And it might seem like a small change, but it has a big impact when the web pages are transferred thousands of times a day by users. So it's obviously a big change. So what was the change? Well, it was a big, a sort of big win change. Is that image upload size was limited down to 1 megabyte per image. Now that, as you might imagine, had a huge impact. Certainly from my personal experience, I've managed websites where maybe in the past we weren't as vigilant in capping that upload. So of course, when you look at your server, you go back in the dashboard and you look at how much data is in your server. That itself can make a massive difference. So it's obviously been implemented to reduce any outliers and huge image files that are energy intensive.
I wonder if that image size is across all layouts and templates, or it's just like, front page, for example, as well.
Mm-hmm. So,
yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. No, if you could, I do.
Oh yeah, okay, perfect. Yeah. And I was wondering if the image upload size was across all templates and layouts, like for example, the front page as well.
Yes.
It's like banner, white, right?
Mm. No, I sorry, I do apologise. I agree. No, I agree. In principle, yes. I'm not going to rule out the possibility that there may be custom pages on the network somewhere, but this is like it's a platform that, as you say, everyone gets the same interface. Everyone gets the same. So, like when images are uploaded, it's my understanding that yes, anytime somebody tries to upload an image, they meet that cap. I'm not going to exclude the possibility that there may be somebody who's done a page somewhere that maybe has done that. But on the whole, the framework, the actual EdWeb 2 framework, the product, you will meet that cap is truth. So that's my understanding, and I will admit, I may not precisely know, but that's my understanding. We're talking about a product, and that's been implemented across the product.
Okay.
Yeah, and on top of that, all images have been automatically converted to the WebP format. And WebP format itself, I've got some data here that WebP itself is around 25% to 34% smaller than JPEGs, and therefore a quick win for making your website more efficient. I've got a little bit more information here, but essentially, my understanding is that we used, I think it was the EdWeb 2 team that used a Drupal module. It was the WebP module, which essentially, my understanding is that the WebP module applies a filter that means that users can upload images following the usual guidance that we offer, and the application does the rest. So it's actually a WebP module that's doing the work. And although I don't use it myself, that is, I'm trying to sort of emphasize the importance of the fact that I think our senior web developer, Billy Waldrop, says here that over time they've looked at options for image optimization in the past, but all of them in some way required significant manual effort. This module is something that you could apply across the network, and the changes that come with that across it, I mean, it's trying to emphasize the scale here, but being able to implement a change like that across a wide range of websites and web pages. So it's powerful, and it maybe took a while to find the right solution, but when it was found, it had a powerful impact on our, a big win, to put it bluntly. And I think it's to try and emphasize, it's kind of hard to talk about other frameworks, but the power of the Drupal framework, that it's nice that these things come along. I remember talk about the lazy load, for example. Lazy load came along, and that was something that could be brought in through the framework, that you could apply that across the framework. Now, I'm not saying it's that straightforward, but I do, and it's kind of hard to talk about other frameworks, but there is a real power there, and especially when you're dealing with scale, and the scale that we're dealing with at the EdWeb 2 platform, these are big changes that have big consequences and really have big impact on things. So it's nice to, or certainly nice to observe that. So I'll go there. And just also to mention that the importance of data tools. The interns used a number of digital sustainability tools to try and measure, to try and measure the impact on our web estate. Basically, I've mentioned a couple here: EcoGrader and Website Carbon Calculator. I personally not use these too often, but these were certainly tools that I think Osh and the team were using to again get the data. And I think that's the pattern that we've been observing, is that people are trying to get the data. I personally don't entirely, if somebody would say to me, do these tools, are they perfect? And I say, well, I don't know, but they're an insight. And I would imagine that certainly the team have been using tools like this to get an insight, to give you an insight as to what's going on in your state. So I think that's certainly what we're talking about here, is that having some information is better than having no information. So certainly these were tools that were used by the team. And also I just wanted to mention, a sort of shout out, that we've collaborated, the university's collaborated with, we use a product called Little Forest. Now it's a web governance software provider, and they've partnered with the university for a long time. And I'm familiar with them because I'm really obsessed in web accessibility. And as part of our web accessibility audit strategy, the central tool that we use for web accessibility governance is Little Forest, and it's an online software as a service. You can look them up, and they've partnered with the university for a number of years. And I just mentioned that although I'm familiar with them for website accessibility governance, they do more than that. We actually, the university as a whole uses it for website governance for the whole web estate across the university, like a web registry for the websites that we have across our state, trying to identify the nature and the scale of the websites in our website estate, which can get kind of scary. I better stop talking about that. And they've been doing a lot of work. They're a great company because they've really been very collaborative and worked with the team to identify further metrics for their website sustainability feature as part of their product. So they've been doing great work to help us get more data as part of their efforts to doing web registry work and to web governance work. By scanning our web estate, we were able to try and get more metrics using techniques, and they've been very collaborative in helping us to do that. So that's been a very good relationship for the university, and we're very happy that they're the kind of company that really have engaged with us, that we've asked them, well, can you do this? And they've really come back and done a lot of work with us. So I just wanted to give them a shout out because they've really been a very key part of that approach, and it's something I'd just like to point out there. And again, you can read more about what I've just been talking about in that particular web blog post. It's also in that big list of sustainability posts as well. So if you go to that blog post list, that'll be there as well. And there'll be also a number of great things as well. Also, if you'd like to learn more, you're welcome to join us. We're going to be hosting a Drupal Camp Scotland at the University of Edinburgh in November, 7th of November 2025. And if we'd love you to come, and if you manage to join us, you'll be able to meet a number of the University of Edinburgh team alongside a whole number of guests from the Drupal community. I sadly didn't make it last year, but I'm hoping to make it this year, obviously. And from what I heard, last year was an excellent event, and I know that I was able to go down to the Drupal Camp England. So these Drupal Camp events are really great events, and we really do welcome you to come and join us. And the link is there. And although it's still early, I know it's still early days. They've still got the submissions coming in, but I would highly recommend you, if you can, join us for that. It's a great opportunity to mix with many people, and we've had some really impressive visitors last year, and I'm hoping again this year we'll do equally as well. So. The Open Web Manifesto, why does it matter? Again, I'm not an expert in other frameworks, but there's something about the Drupal Open Web Manifesto that it's something that I'm not as aware other frameworks have. Now, experts will correct me on this, but there's something about Drupal's commitment to the open web and a belief in its power as a digital public good. It's something that is not just talk. There's real efforts within the community to deliver on that, and by going to the Open Web Manifesto link, you'll see that there's a real commitment there for things like digital inclusion and open access, and it does tie in rather nicely with what we're trying to do here. You've got open access, open standards, digital inclusion as part of the Open Manifesto approach. Portability over lock-in, which is in the long term lower term waste. I certainly know at the university, many years ago, we've had products where we're locked into web systems which were lock-in, and we are now pretty much, to the best of my knowledge, well, for a start, Drupal is the de facto web content management system for the University of Edinburgh, so it's open source. So, like, officially, it's an open source platform, and I would. It's the only way to go, really. I would be astonished if the university considered any future product in web content management that wasn't open source. So open source is key to our strategy. And I certainly know over time, when you're talking about a number of years, having an open source platform, ultimately you own the code. You ultimately own that database, you own that code base. And so maybe in the past with proprietary products, you're maybe having to, if you're having to move on for whatever reason, at least with open source, you really do own that thing. Whereas with private providers, that's maybe not necessarily always the case of who actually owns your data, which is becoming ever more important. And transparency in itself brings trust and resilience. That if anyone's going to challenge what I say or anyone says about this, it's open source. People can go and check the code, they can check and again the metrics and the data to try and that these approaches are all built in the open. These are open buildings, these are open infrastructures that people can examine, whereas sometimes with private providers it's not always entirely clear what their commitment is. I'm not blaming anybody, it's just because it's behind a wall you can't always tell, whereas with open source it's just out there. Anyone can download the code base and see for themselves what's going on. Just getting close to yeah, don't worry, getting close to the end here. So just some common pitfalls and myths. Again, with images are fine with cached. Even on the server side, we've noticed that by imposing a cap like that, it makes a massive difference even to your hosting. And I'm afraid in the past I've had my emails from the server administrator saying why do we have several gigabytes of when actually maybe it's images that really didn't have to be there. So sometimes it's maybe not a bad thing to be told you can't put up that high resolution image. Sometimes it's good to have that taken out of your hands. Accessibility slows us down, and this idea of it prevents rework, I think, to my mind, that just comes back to this attitude that with accessibility, sometimes the attitude is we'll optimize that later. And later rarely comes. It's something that if you can implement as much as you can into your workflow before, and then try and avoid the common issues, then the more you can do that work beforehand, then you're going to save yourself a lot of pain down the road, basically, from that. So these are just some ideas about maybe some quick wins for people's websites. If you've got your own Drupal website, it's a lot of the time just going through and just checking a lot of the things that are properly configured. I like editorially. I do like it a lot as a module. I have to admit, we don't use it on our website, and EdWeb2 doesn't use it on our website. And that's largely because we have a very sophisticated workflow and governance there, not only within the platform, but also specific training and support behind the platform. So we don't, I don't think editorial would be a natural fit within what we do, but I think the team would be open-minded to something like that. But certainly for a lot of other websites, it's certainly be worth them considering for sort of guardrails. Looking at third-party scripts and just doing an audit of your site to see, is there something that is slowing up your web page? Is there something that could be reviewed for that? And over time, setting page weight budgets and JavaScript budgets to try and understand what can be constrained, as it were. And again, this idea of a roadmap, continuing to do the work over like a month and a quarter, it's a sustainable, ongoing effort. One of the issues that we come across in accessibility constantly is that it never ends. Like I'm always being told, "All right, well, haven't we done it yet?" It's like, no, this will never. I work at the University of Edinburgh. This will never end. The people who I work with, trust me, this will never. We're going to be doing this forever. Right? So this trying to embed a sort of a mindset that this is something that will be done through reviews, like quarterly reviews, and working with key post holders and stakeholders about how they fit that into their ongoing workflow and how these measures can be built into that. So like having baseline things like the low-hanging fruit, like I described, like images is an obvious one. Reviewing your CI/CD pipeline and seeing some things that crop up. If somebody tries to introduce something to a code base, maybe we can try and identify that and flag that early. Dashboards that maybe alert to you things that are happening in your web estate that you're not aware of, and getting the data to raise those things. Constantly looking at content auditing or content pruning, template refactors, media strategy. Maybe ask your media strategy. Where are you hosting your videos? These are questions that may be worth asking. I don't know, but I know at the university what we're doing. But in general, it may be worth asking that question if your business is video rich. It may be worth asking, well, where are you hosting your videos, and what strategy do they have for long-term sustainability? And of course, a hosting review and reporting that and trying to understand how green is your hosting provider and how receptive are they to making the changes to make ongoing efforts to more sustainable hosting. I promised you a workshop. Now, I did this last year, and I can assure you, I'll tell you what happened. People were very nice and people polite, and then my memory is that 90% of the audience stood up and left. So I'm not offended. at all, because the people who stayed were the best. They were the ones who were committed to the cause. They wanted to know more. They wanted to engage in dialogue with their fellow Drupalistas, and it was for the best. Those who went on, I wasn't offended. It's a busy time. DrupalCon's a very busy organisation. I'm glad you made it this far, to be brutally honest, and I'm very grateful. So, as the game host presenter says, just a bit of fun, nothing serious, just a bit of fun. It's a bit informal. Do feel to have a little discussion and basically say what aligned changes could somebody make on your web estate? What could you do in the next 30 days to look at this? What budget numbers could you track and optimize on your sites? What third parties? It's more just to have a discussion and say, well, what could we do with our existing websites and see what we could do based upon what we've been talking about today to maybe improve. And my experience was that to improve awareness amongst the people that you're working with, that you'll have teams in different, like you'll have developers, you'll have hosting, you'll have product, you'll have content, you'll have communications. It's having conversations with your teams where you're able to actually talk to each other and actually kind of cross-reference and say, well, if different teams are able to do their thing and come together, it starts a dialogue. And I certainly know at the University of Edinburgh, that's been the most, I would imagine, the legacy of what's happened with the sustainable internships is that it's really provoked a dialogue where people have really engaged with this across a whole swathe of the departments and the post holders. And I think it's to create that discussion amongst it, and then ideally something to take back to your teams and your people and be able to discuss with them, how can we take this forward in our approach and as to how we're taking forward our web strategy. So that's the idea. If anyone's still here in 10-15 minutes, we can do a little wrap up and maybe type up some notes, but we're nearly done. I know it's busy, I know DrupalCon's busy, so you have to go, I'm not offended, but it'd be great if you hung around and we can maybe sort of like exchange some ideas after a 10-minute, and you probably deserve a break from me anyway, so there you go. Choose a friend. It's okay.
Very sad.
I think there was most important people like more complex stuff. Yeah, I found it very interesting. I think the web team. Actually, something I would Is it like related? Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's interesting. No, because I also thought it's interesting because I mean, web is actually a proprietary form by Google. Yeah, I mean, I know, of course, they every time you check the page speed, they always say you, of course. But it's, I think, like, it's their format. Yeah, I mean, but there's a conflict. I think, like, the open I mean, not at the moment, of course, because it's free, but it could be like yeah, but I mean, yeah, that's it.
But I said once that they will be interested in changes to the program stay consistent.
I forgot part of them.
That was okay. This is incredibly rude. My wife wants a picture.
Oh, of course.
I know this is a stranger.
So I'm taking advantage of it.
Yeah. It's also working.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
I have to say that.
At the end of the day,
but tables was also something that we at least I don't know if it's actually applied. Yeah, but I mean, what I also when you make all these suggestions and stuff, it's like at least for my company, we are quite on track actually. I mean, we use caching, we use TrickPile. Well, we are like the WebC tables also. A lot of yeah, and maybe yeah, we will also I think budget numbers is meant like the load and how much
how to deal with this freedom we want optimization we want to time ecosystem pages because for example it's a code this also gives the at least two forces going one against another.
I mean, the budget numbers, I mean, it's like page load, like how much, no? I mean, yeah, because I'm not really familiar with the term, but I mean, it's normally, the page itself is usually, I mean, very little. As far as I'm concerned, normally, I mean, it's the images that are
that's the thought.
yeah, exactly. But I mean, the biggest chunk of usually is images. Maybe audio. Yeah, possibly, but yeah. I mean, people with aggregation and such things. Because I thought having a lot of multimedia limiting creativity is also like in the context of accessibility. I mean, people they sometimes cannot even use the images of the videos. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's also a different creativity. But this is also lazy loading.
And I'm trying to
So, and you have a lot of third party scripts. I thought about the Google Tag Manager we have, but then is everything loaded? And I mean, we have some on our sites. We have some. If we have third-party scripts, like for example, I mean, also I mean, kind of YouTube, I would say, like an embedding. It's not itself a script, but I mean, it loads a lot of stuff in the end. But we have like, I mean, this is also the data privacy compliance we have to load on content. This is also, I think, also we have some forms that are loaded from providers, form provider, basically. I don't know if you know Marketo or Marketo is from Adobe, but it's like a form builder. and you can put a lot of workflows, email and stuff, and it's like a marketing. Yeah, it's true. That's
Go to your website and
yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's really like a lot of interaction happens not for social media.
yeah, one thing that first you want to also guide your website.
Yeah, but do you actually? I mean, it depends. I would say, you know, because I mean, on the social media, you can interact with them. Like, if they can interact also with you, which gives them kind of like I don't want to say impression, but not fake feeling, but they can actually. I mean, they can also interact on your site. But I mean, they would need at least with an email form and they need to be identified, no? Or they. Yeah. Okay, that's but it's different.
Can I say?
Yeah, but you're right. It's part of the script.
Then I use this, but then I just work around each other, and then something they side tweets are this like just deal with it.
Yeah.
And that's why
I know that somehow everything in different.
Yeah, but I'm.
because they also review that's what
But otherwise, yeah. I think we can use it at the moment.
but we have used
Yeah, but I it's less and less because
educate.
Yeah, I also had something else that I mean, it was one thing interesting about the WebP and like it's content. The other one I forgot.
There's one way
Already.
very old.
I would have to look at the slides again. Let me see.
This is where I was also
Hi, sorry. I appreciate that people are probably wanting to leave very soon. So what I'll try and do is I'll just try and have a quick, maybe like amongst little groups. If somebody could grab a microphone from every group and maybe just sort of give a kind of summary of what you've just been discussing and just share with everybody about, okay, well, the kind of things, just a kind of overview of the kind of things you were discussing there about some of the ideas. So if somebody wants to grab the microphone and just have a little, just to kind of summarise some of the things you were talking about. And you won't be judged, I promise.
Sitting here, right?
Yeah.
We were discussing a bit about WebP, if it's a little bit a contradiction to open source, because it's a GUI format. And I personally recommended using AWIF instead, because it's even smaller. Yeah, we were also talking about third-party scripts a bit. Yeah, weak. And accessibility, of course, but nothing too specific.
It's good that I always learn something when I do this. So I didn't actually know about the status between the concerns about the license between WebP and AVIF. I didn't actually know that, to be completely honest, but that's interesting. It's interesting. Again, I'm not an expert in this stuff. My understanding is that from Drupal 11 onwards, they're going to make efforts to try and bring more AVIF
Yeah,
in.
because it's even smaller, so.
Yeah, as I say, I know it's not quite that straightforward, but I know that again, this idea of the Drupal train tracks is that by bringing in these changes and you're on the framework, you can take advantage of that. I know it's not quite that straightforward, but it's interesting. And I will admit, I didn't actually know the sort of subtleties about them, so I'll need to go and look that up. But that is interesting to know about that. That's good to hear.
Could you remind us the differences in the organizations who back up the different?
I don't
And I do
exactly
apologise.
what
Could
I know,
you? I do apologise. Could you also repeat his question so it goes in the microphone because they're not appearing in the recording?
he wanted me to point out the differences between the formats. I don't know exactly, but I know that AWIF is supported by more companies and WebP essentially is by Google.
And I know nothing, but my understanding is that AVIF is not entirely supported fully yet. It's I don't really know. I might have to look it up.
Internet Explorer 8 or something.
Well, you never know. You'd be surprised. There'll be somebody out there telling me that they're still on Internet Explorer 8, and there may be reasons for that. Yeah, okay.
There may be reasons, yeah, but they are used to websites looking like
This is an interesting discussion that we'll have to take outside. Okay, all right,
Yeah.
We also spoke about WebP, and but we also pointed out that public organizations and governments are more interested in those topics than private companies.
Yeah.
So, for example, in France, this kind of clients just already comes to us to talk about these topics and want websites, sustainable websites, and there are people who audit websites at the French governments, for instance. Whereas it's more, you have to be more pedagogical with private companies, and it's tougher to achieve, to make them accept that the website should be sustainable.
I completely agree with you. Because I work for a public sector organisation, I work for a public sector university, my world is completely different to somebody in the private sector. I mean, so I can only talk about the United Kingdom, but the European Accessibility Act is meant to, it's still too early, it's too early days, but I think that's going to shake up certain sectors in the European Union, whereas in Britain, public sector versus private sector, there's just a gulf of difference between people like me who have no choice. I have to care about the accessibility guidelines and increasingly sustainability, because that's been an effort within the university, a big effort. Trying to talk to people in the private sector, again, a different conversation.
Some clients in the private sector told me that they didn't need accessibility because they didn't have visitors.
I hear you. In some ways, I'm lucky. In some ways, that because of my employer, I'm forced. I have no choice. I have to think almost daily about the WCAG 2.2 AA. Whereas in certain parts of the private sector, and I'm sorry to say this, even in Britain, I'm personally very disappointed that the efforts that have gone in the European Union, the British government, because we left the European Union, which was a mistake, but let's not go there, but it was. So I see what's happening with the European Accessibility Act, and although it's not perfect, there's really some great efforts in its early days. We don't have that similar push currently in the United Kingdom, and sadly to say, because the legislation that I fall under, the Public Sector Body Accessibility Regulations, that was European legislation originally, and we inherited that, but we are not taking it further, and I'm saddened about that. And it's actually something I'm very angry about, to be brutally honest, is that the British government at this time are not pressing ahead in the way that I think the European Union are pressing ahead, and we're not, or at least it's the sentiment of it. That's the thing, that whether the reality or not, it's the sentiment, and I'm personally quite upset about that. There are people, sorry, you've got me started. There are people, well, there's one particular company that really made me angry, but let's try not go there. There's a particular company in Britain that, and I'm slightly on the outside of this, but I don't mind saying that, as far as I could tell, they have fired their accessibility team. They're a financial services company, and as far as I can tell from the outside, they have fired their accessibility team. And their website, last time I looked, still said, we have a leadership team, we have an accessibility team, we have a leadership accessibility team. They fired them. It's still on the website, and they still are virtue signaling their efforts to this. And so I'm afraid, the point I'm trying to make is that I was forced, and I'm quite glad I was forced, but I was forced to recognise accessibility through my role. And I've been hearing these financial service companies and other companies who've been talking a good game for several years and how proud they are of their team and how proud and then, of course, when things get tough for people financially, they're the first out. Have you noticed that? They're the first out of the building. And so, sorry, that was a rant, but I don't care because it does make me really angry. And I'm afraid to say that the reason people like me paid attention, because I wasn't perfect 5-6 years ago, I wasn't perfect, but the reason people like me paid attention because it was the law. And I had no choice. And we've got the Cabinet Digital and Data Office in Britain that are actively looking at us. We're not paranoid, we know. They're looking at our website. So it's enforcement. And I'm sorry, that's how you get people's attention. And that's why I'm subtly trying to say that I'm an optimist, but I'm not going to pretend it's going to happen anytime soon. But in the same way that people like me are forced to pay attention to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, this draft could be, for Web Sustainability Guidelines, this could be a pathway that a lot of public sector and other organisations may have to follow. Certainly at the University of Edinburgh, that's what we're doing, and I think it's going to be increasingly the case for other sectors. So I'm an optimist. Sorry, rant over for now. Sorry, thank you so much for and just like 1 minute.
A bit smaller.
Yeah.
So we're a bit looking at how in our companies, who is doing the accessibility testing, what can we get out of it, can we get more out of it. I also talked about videos. I work for public employment sector in Flanders. And like there's lots of content on our website which is about what we do, and those videos have to be absolutely accessible. Some educational videos are still on there because they're very useful for schools or for other people, but not everything is already accessible, so that's still a lot of work to be done. But, for the website itself, like our intranet is very well tested because we have colleagues working at help desk and they need to do it, and it's really fun seeing them testing it together and seeing, oh, but I have no problem with this because I use that tool and you can use this tool, and they decide, oh, this one you have to repair that and this one you use that tool. So it's like really working on it together.
That's really good to hear. Because I've heard anecdotally, I've not actually visited them, but I've got a couple of organisations that I've heard of. Google have accessibility sort of labs, I think. They used to have them around the world, and they had one in London. I've not been to it yet, but I've heard about them. And I think there's certain other companies that do sort of these kind of accessibility labs in-house, and people are empathy labs and things. And I think Skyscanner is also a name that comes to mind as well. So there's
we do have a user testing, but for internet testing, we don't need a lab. We need a computer and a way to get them together and grab a coffee and just sit around and talk and do. And
excellent.
It's quite low tech.
No, but that's, as you say, user testing, absolutely. That's very fun.
It's a bit bigger. So I came from a big pharma company, international, large one. So we are taking care of 68 large national websites, and even in this, not even in this sector, there is a big push on accessibility. Really big push, big pressure. So right now, where we are thinking how to. We have very not very, but we have aggressive release cycle. We are releasing every 2 weeks, sometimes every week, sometimes even like more often. And we are trying to do also the accessibility analysis and evaluation after every release. And right now we are trying to find a way, and we are at the very beginning actually, we are trying to find a way how to watch some trends and how to get it into our like CI/CD approach, and to be able to do it as much automated way with at least the human effort at the end. So this is where we are, and we are trying to do. And we are using WebP for all images, and it's open source. It was released by Google in 2010. I'm not saying it's better, just saying that for our thousands of images we're using WebP.
Yeah. Certainly that's one of the things that came through from the Edinburgh case study, is that the impact it had, and of course the web estate we have. So to be able to make a change like that across, I think that's what Billy was saying, and that quote I gave you, Billy's the senior web developer for the university, and that's the point, that they were looking for solutions, and I think it was particularly this WebP module that was something that they could implement at scale. And it made a massive impact, I think. So that was a huge factor in the kind of level of difference you can make with the right architectural technology approach.
And one thing that I'm taking back from here, it was a really good thing, and I have to check with our business whether we have it or not. I really like the note about an optional transcript for videos, because sometimes even myself, I don't want to hear something or watch, I just want to read it. So that would be great as an option. And
I think you're quite right. It was best practice, certainly at the university, and I think it's meant to be best practice to provide a transcript. Something that I've personally found quite interesting, because I was doing some reading at some point in this, is that, I mean, you probably know this already, but when it basically, ultimately, if you're in the unfortunate position where you're not able to see or hear, then a transcript's really your only hope when you're trying to access a video, because that works with the screen reader, and then the screen reader can translate that to Braille. So again, I like the way when a solution comes along that's quite universal, that it's a good thing for everybody. And as you say, you might be in a really bad mobile reception where basically you want to get an idea of what's going on in the content, but you don't necessarily want the full. But so having that universal approach, that holistic approach, is a good effort. One more.
We basically discussed the first topic, which was what are the changes that we could feasibly do in the 30 days. And we thought about, and we had a suggestion about the editorial module, which I did not was aware that that existed, which could add some guardrails for the editorial, which is always a good start. We also suggested to have more from the accessibility point of view, to generate using AI alt text, because the alt text could enforce that, but also maybe the quality of the alt text is not good enough. No, so it is better than nothing, but it's not good enough. So we suggested that, but then we created a whole discussion about AI is actually creating problems or actually or not, or resolving the problems, because then you are trying to save some energy, carbon footprint, but you are generating because of the how you do it.
We said it was the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
We said it was the elephant in the room.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then how you add this to the whole calculation, no? But then I think if you do it responsibly, I think there is a lot of added benefit to generate this alt text on using AI. No, it's better than someone using that. And the third one, which was also the WebP, which we discussed also, which is quite interesting. Even though there is this a little bit of vendor locking and not so much of compatibility, it's also something that we would probably try to implement this at least as a first level implementation for the and then the time is up.
No, that's really. I'm not an expert in this. I've heard that there are people working particularly with the Drupal CMS. I believe that there's work going on to implement these strategies of, say that you have a large web estate or a large website and you start running Drupal CMS, that they're working on automating alt text. I think, I'm not very knowledgeable about this, but I did read somewhere that people are working on that. I think in Drupal CMS, I'm always careful because I'm a lot more comfortable talking about Drupal core, because Drupal core is a much more stripped down, straightforward thing first.
Apparently there is the Drupal AI module, which you can use it. There are like some features from that, which one of them is to use the AI to also...
That sounds right. And so I think, so I'm always a little bit cautious, as I say, that when you start with core, you've just got the core essentials and you can build up from there. And as you say, with the Drupal AI module, probably as part of the Drupal CMS, so, you are able to then take forward those kind of strategies. I mean, as I say, I know that there's, as you heard earlier on, there's if you saw the Dries note, there's a lot of work in AI. I mean, of course, everywhere there's AI, but there's a lot of work going on in Drupal AI, and that's interesting. Some good, some concerning. So but I've heard about those efforts, and I think it's interesting. And I try and have an open mind. I mean, like you say, this could also bring problems that we're not appreciating. That what is the cost of these modules? If you're using Drupal AI features, what's the cost of those? And again, how do you, I mean, that's the thing we're trying to establish at the university. We're trying to do our own models, largely to understand, so what is taking place. We don't have any data to understand what is it that we're doing that we're taking place. So, like what does it take to analyze an image and then translate into text? What does that actually involve in terms of energy usage? So those are the kind of I'm not saying we're doing that, but that's the long-term thing of, well, so there's a trade-off. But at the same time, there's definitely serious people who are very interested in these Drupal AI efforts to try and do automated alt text. And there's some serious people. I remember, there's a guy called Mike Gifford, I think he wrote, he's an accessibility expert, he's a big Drupal accessibility expert, and he was talking very positively about that area. So I try and have an open mind, and I think I was just struck with how, although I'm open-minded to AI, I'm just struck how there is a nice, the sustainability and accessibility do seem to dovetail and overlap quite nicely sometimes. There's some nice crossovers there, and I do see that as potentially work. So anyway, thank you for that. I think I really appreciate your time. I know that time is ticking. I'm really just wanting to say finally that, so just some takeaways about accessibility and performance by default, measure, publish, improve, align with the open web values, and start this month, but iterate, make it an ongoing effort that's built in and baked into your workflows. Something, because as I say, the danger is that people just walk away and it stops happening. If you build it into your workflows in your organization, it continues on for the next generation, I suppose. Just thank you so much. Don't worry about the appendix. I'm putting these slides up if you're still interested. I will put the slides up on the website, so they'll be on the DrupalCon website pretty soon. I just want to thank you very much. If you want to be kind, I do have a QR code if you want to submit any feedback. But otherwise, I really appreciate you hanging in there. I know it was a long talk, and I'll let you go. And do enjoy the rest of this week. It's going to be great, and I really appreciate your time today. So thank you. Thank you. It was a great session, Q&A. I've got some really interesting feedback there. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.